March 4, 2026, 5:08 in the morning, local time off the southern coast of Sri Lanka. A distress signal breaks the silence of the Indian Ocean. It comes from the Iranian frigate IRIS Dena, a warship the Islamic Republic Navy considered one of its finest. Within minutes, the ship is gone. Not damaged, not listing, gone. Swallowed by the sea with most of her crew still aboard. By mid-morning, the Pentagon confirmed what the world already suspected. A United States Navy fast attack submarine had just carried out the first torpedo kill of an enemy warship since World War II. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave it a name that would echo across every military capital on Earth: Quiet Death. The IRIS Dena was a Mauj-class frigate, hull number 75. She displaced between 1,300 and 1,500 tons and stretched nearly 100 meters in length. She carried 4 Qatar anti-ship cruise missiles, Sayed surface-to-air missiles, a 76mm main deck gun, and a 3-dimensional phased array radar system. She had a crew of approximately 180 sailors. She was, by every standard measurement, a capable and modern warship. She was also, on the morning of March 4, 2026, returning from a multinational naval exercise. The Indian Navy had hosted the Milan 2026 International Fleet Review and Exercise at Visakhapatnam from February 18 to February 25. Iran had sent the Dena as its representative. Rear Admiral Shahram Irani, Iran's naval commander, had personally attended the accompanying Indian Ocean Naval Symposium conclave, which drew delegations from 33 nations. The ship's deployment had been publicly announced by Iranian state media. Her route home was broadly known. She was transiting southward around Sri Lanka on her way back to Iranian waters when the torpedo found her. The weapon was a single Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo, fired from a United States fast attack submarine operating submerged in international waters roughly 40 nautical miles south of the port city of Galway. The Mark 48 has been the backbone of United States submarine warfare since it entered service in 1972. It is wire-guided, meaning the submarine crew can steer it in flight, and it homes on its target using active and passive sonar in the terminal phase. It carries a 295-kilogram high-explosive warhead designed to detonate beneath a ship's keel, generating an underwater shockwave that breaks the vessel's spine rather than simply punching a hole in the hull. Pentagon footage released after the strike showed the torpedo striking beneath the stern of the Dena. The keel cracked. The ship broke apart and sank within minutes. The crew had no meaningful warning. The submarine that fired the shot was never seen. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, stated plainly that for the first time since 1945, a United States Navy fast attack submarine had sunk an enemy combatant vessel using a single torpedo to achieve immediate effect. The last time a United States submarine sank an enemy warship by torpedo was August 14, 1945. The vessel was the USS Torsk. She sank 2 Japanese coastal defense vessels on that single day. That was the final day of the Pacific War. Between that moment and March 4, 2026, a span of more than 80 years passed without a single torpedo kill by an American submarine in combat. Every conflict in between, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, used air power, surface fire, and ground forces. The submarine, the most lethal hunter beneath the sea, sat quiet for 8 decades. On March 4, 2026, that silence ended in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka's Foreign Minister Vijitha Herath informed Parliament within hours. The Sri Lanka Navy received the distress signal and dispatched rescue vessels immediately, with the Sri Lanka Air Force joining the search and rescue operation by air. When rescue boats reached the coordinates, approximately 75 kilometers south of Gal, they found oil slicks, floating debris, and life rafts. The Dena herself was already on the seabed. 32 survivors were pulled from the water and transported to Karapatia Teaching Hospital in Gal. Sri Lanka's Navy later recovered 87 bodies. Dozens more crew members were never found. Of a crew of approximately 180, fewer than 1/5 survived. Sri Lankan authorities refused to release their own rescue footage, citing the involvement of another nation's military. They were measured, deliberate, and careful. Over 1 million Sri Lankan citizens work in the Middle East. Colombo had every reason to stay out of what was unfolding. Now, 3 failures made this moment possible, and each one compounded the last. The first failure was the assumption that distance provided safety. The Dena was not in the Persian Gulf. She was not in the Gulf of Oman. She was in the Indian Ocean, 4,000 kilometers from Tehran, returning from a goodwill exercise attended by 33 nations. Iranian naval planners operated on the reasonable expectation that a vessel in international waters, far from any declared combat theater, transiting a route that had been publicly announced, was not an immediate target. That expectation was wrong. The United States Central Command Commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, had already stated publicly that the objective of Operation Epic Fury was to sink Iran's entire navy. No geographic boundary was placed on that objective. The Dena's distance from the Gulf did not protect her. It simply meant she died in quieter water. The second failure was an intelligence gap in tracking United States submarine movements. Surface ships can be spotted by satellite, aircraft can be detected by radar. A fast attack submarine running silent at depth in the open ocean is invisible to almost every sensor an adversary possesses. Iran had no reliable means of tracking the location of United States attack submarines in the Indian Ocean theater. She could not know one was trailing the Dena. She could not warn her crew. She could not attempt evasion. The Mark 48 travels at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour underwater. From the moment of launch to the moment of detonation, the Dena's crew had seconds at most. Undersea warfare operates on a brutal asymmetry. The submarine chooses when and whether to reveal itself entirely on its own terms. The surface navy, by contrast, broadcasts its presence through wake, radar emissions, engine noise, and thermal signature. That asymmetry defined the outcome before a single order was given. The third failure was a broader strategic miscalculation about the scope of American intent. The conflict that became Operation Epic Fury did not emerge without warning. Iran had suppressed domestic protests with extreme force in the months prior, with independent estimates placing the death toll between 7,000 and 43,000 civilians. A United States carrier strike group had deployed to the region. Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces had attempted to seize a United States-flagged tanker in the Gulf of Oman on February 3. Oman-mediated nuclear talks had collapsed. Every indicator pointed toward a military confrontation. Yet the Dena sailed to an international exercise and began her return journey as though the diplomatic and military environment had not fundamentally changed. The decision to send a warship on a widely publicized round trip through contested waters during an escalating confrontation with the United States reflected a failure to understand how rapidly that confrontation would become kinetic and how broadly it would be applied. The sinking of the Dena was not an isolated strike. It occurred on the fifth day of a conflict that had already killed more than 1,045 Iranians, destroyed 2,000 military and nuclear sites across Iran, and eliminated most of Iran's principal naval assets in the Gulf. The United States and Israel had launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28, 2026. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in strikes around March 1. By March 4, United States Central Command reported striking or sinking more than 20 Iranian naval vessels in total, including the IRIS Shahid Sayed Shirazi, the drone-carrying vessel Shahid Bagheri, and the forward-based ship IRIS Makran. Iran's Konarak naval base was photographed in flames by satellite imagery. The Dena was the furthest flung casualty of that campaign, sunk in an ocean where no one expected the war to reach. Iran's response to the totality of these strikes was direct and severe. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps declared that all American and Israeli assets across the Middle East had become legitimate targets. Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage through which roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply transits. 3 oil tankers were struck in the following days. Freight rates for very large crude carriers reached record highs. United States gasoline prices climbed to $3.20 per gallon within the week. Iranian missiles and drones struck targets across multiple countries. The United States Embassy in Dubai was hit. A CIA facility in Riyadh was struck by a drone. Qatar's Hamad International Airport was targeted. A British Royal Air Force base in Cyprus was hit, prompting France and Greece to deploy naval and air assets. 4 United States service members were killed in a drone strike at Port Shuaibah, Kuwait, bringing the total American military death toll in the conflict to 6. The conflict that American and Israeli planners had described as controlled and limited had, within 5 days, drawn fires from the Indian Ocean to the eastern Mediterranean. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session on February 28. Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the strikes as a grave threat to international peace and security, stating that the operation had squandered an opportunity for diplomacy while negotiations were still active. Russia called the strikes an unprovoked act of armed aggression. China called them brazen. Iran's representative declared them a war crime. The United States ambassador responded that the objective was to ensure Iran could never threaten the world with a nuclear weapon. No resolution passed. The 5 permanent members were divided, as they had been on every crisis of this magnitude for a generation, and the emergency session ended with statements but no binding outcome. The Council's paralysis left every nation in the region to calculate its own exposure and its own response. The lesson embedded in the ocean south of Gal is one that every naval commander, every strategic planner, and every government watching from the outside must now absorb. For 80 years, the torpedo kill belonged to history, to textbooks, to the Pacific War, and the Cold War simulations that followed. March 4, 2026, removed it from history and returned it to the present. A warship that was well-armed, well-crewed, and sailing in open waters far from any declared battle zone was tracked, targeted, and destroyed without warning by a vessel her crew never saw. The geometry of modern naval power had just shifted in full view of the world. Distance no longer means safety. A publicized route is not a protected route, and a navy that cannot track the submarines arrayed against it has no reliable defense against them. Those conclusions do not apply only to Iran. They apply to every navy on Earth that has watched this week unfold. The Strait of Hormuz remains under threat. Iran has declared any vessel attempting that passage a legitimate target, and the first tanker strikes have already sent insurance rates and freight costs to levels not seen in decades. The region has not quieted. The fires that started on February 28 have spread to Lebanon, the Gulf states, Cyprus, and the Indian Ocean. 6 American service members have been killed across the conflict so far. Dozens of Iranian sailors are still missing beneath the surface south of Galeh. What the next 72 hours bring will determine whether this conflict finds any ceiling at all, or whether the events of March 4, 2026 mark not an endpoint, but the moment the war expanded beyond anyone's original intent. We will follow every development as it comes.